Good evening. I'm Eagle Cloud. I'll be your trance medium for this evening. Although I must admit, due to a prior unavoidable social event early this afternoon, I may be somewhat more well done than medium. But after all, if the spirits can't take a joke from those filled with the spirits, never mind. But seriously, for you people who came in that might be seeing this from out of town, we should get serious. I'd like to say welcome to this meeting at the cosmic level of your Amway distributors. By God, let's get really serious. I was going to ask if you would like to entertain some expanded notes regarding some recent Kairoot stories and other subversive tales. The headings of which you've already heard, some of you. But one of them was that, or at least the expanded version, is that ordinary health is always noisy. And I noticed the time that was run by some of you, it just absolutely brought the house down. I mean, people were just astounded. To begin with, talk would seem to be a needed support to secondary intellectual and physical health of routine people. While on the other hand, what might be the alternative, which God knows everyone who's watching this either hopes there is an alternative or that this will lead you into a good entry level with your local Amway distributor. The alternative would have to be a kind of revolutionary health, which would be more characterized by silence. We have many times covered the area of how it would seem, to start off easy, how it would seem that ordinary people, to be able to hold on to the concept of them being a certain kind of guy, have to continually talk about what kind of guy they are. To run this into a little more specified or specific area, it is also, from a certain view, would appear to be that people cannot keep their correct place in the continuity line of health/illness, which is the same Magnus, just one side or the other. And we're not talking about death. Death does not count. When you're dead, you're not sick. And if you're going to die next week or 6 weeks from now, I mean, if they've given you a guarantee, I'm not talking about some phony baloney doctor that graduated from somewhere out of Tijuana. Don't write me from Mexico. If you're about to die for sure and they give you a guarantee, that's not being sick. That's just it's like a 6-week head start on a party is all you got. But as health is taken at the ordinary level, health is a hobby to people. And dreaming about death, talking about it, but not the actual occurrence of it. So in the same way that ordinary people would seem to be in need of a continual talking about, let me tell you the kind of guy I am, that from one view that you could see that will certainly drive out real good if it was just simply psychological, which it is simply not, of course. Even though it would make sense and would be probably quite acceptable to the psychological community, it is more than that. But it is a fact that verbally, what would appear to be the psychological dress on this skeleton would be that people in some way, their personality, their sense of individuality, their sense of themselves, seems to be in need of a continual talking. It's not an attack. It is simply by now you should be able to have an observation, if you can get above street level, that down there on the street, shall we still be polite and say a large part of what people are talking about at any given time can be narrowed down. You may have to translate it. You may have to really grab your head and take all of 2 or 3 seconds to realize that they can apparently be talking about a book. Except what did they say about this book? What they're saying is the kind of guy they are. Have you heard of this book? Well, yes, I have. God Almighty, that book has changed my life. Are they talking about the book? It is, may I suggest, if it can be correctly translated, it's not the only way, but people are continually addressing the question of what kind of guy I am. Telling others, and if we were simply psychological bobbleheads, we could say that some way people are doing it to themselves. That people's personalities, some people, of course not you and I, if we were psychologists, or Amway distributors, that certainly not you and I, but many people obviously have such an ephemeral grip on the reality of what they are, or the underpinnings of their psychological being is so shaky, are so shaky, that they must continually talk about what kind of guy they are. Maybe. It is simply a fact, without any of that, that you should be able to hear yourself. You can hear the noise running through you at street level, which street level is in you, and you can hear it out there if you want to take the easy way in. But people are continually saying, let me tell you what kind of guy I am. And apparently the sentence can start off, and they can literally be saying continually, let me tell you about a place I went. Let me tell you about a book I read. Let me tell you about a restaurant I frequented. Let me tell you about a new religious organization I found. Let me tell you about a new philosophy. That may start the sentence. It may be, let me tell you this, and that may be a big old colon, and then what follows? It's a song and dance, so let me tell you what kind of guy I am. In that same way, those of you that are up to that point, can you see that in this great hobby that cuts across all lines, more and more every day, it's always been there, but now there's more and more notice of it, recognition of it, of health being a hobby. Can you see that there is a way in which, now health and illness, remember, is the same thing, it's just different ends of a magnet, that ordinary people standing there in the line, helping life support the continuity of running apparently from out there right through all this little, for some people they imagine they see a few little green pastures, one or two brooks, and it kind of goes through the valley of the shadow of death once or twice. And then maybe it kind of rises back in the sunshine, and then it kind of goes over the hill, which, of course, over the hill everybody knows there's a thing that starts with an A over there, and it's not an aviary. In other words, you go over the hill and nobody comes back. But while you're in line, I mean, you got 60 or 70 years to kill. So while you're in line, you got to be some kind of guy. And part of being a kind of guy, where this all started, if you recall, is ordinary health is noisy. And those of you still looking a little blank, right quick, I'm trying to leave the area of actual physical health because that's not the point of this. But just at the ordinary level, listen to people. And it's not because your mother or your grandmother or somebody's a hypochondriac. It's not because that they are just suffering from some kind of psychological weakness that makes them whine and moan. They may do it. But everybody at street level is subject to some of this. That what would appear to be health at the city level, which can be illness, because I'm sure all of you got some kind of relative or in-law that would probably make a poster boy for hypochondria. The sons of bitches can outlive everybody. I mean, that's not just a joke. Almost everybody knows that. That's one of the old jokes, supposedly. I think it's an old joke. It's one of the world's great hypochondriacs. Who was it? I don't know. Oscar Levant. So anybody. Just the world's greatest hypochondriac on their tombstone. If they die at the age of 98, it says, I told you so. I told you I was sick. So the point is now, you've got to take this at least away from the literal street level view of this from the city. That part of health can be somebody that their primary conversation in life may be whining about their health. And yet they may outlive everybody. So do you understand it? And they may apparently be sick. They may spend a large part of their income on medicine. They may go to the doctor all the time. They may limp. They may stay in bed. They may wrap themselves in all kinds of bandages. They may always be having some kind of little something like a severe paper cut But it is still the hobby of health. But notice this hobby, this concern, but hobby is more inclusive, but this concern of talking about health is almost as though that ordinary intelligence, to keep a grip on the full ordinary continuity of health, which is health and illness, that they have to continually talk about it. Whereas, assuming there's got to be an alternative, or what are we all here for, since nobody can afford their own Amway distributorship at this present time, then you're considering, I will assume, that there is an alternative, as many of you already have tasted, and that would be a different kind of health that is not simply the one end of a magnet of am I sick, am I well? And then getting away from the strictly somatic, just the regular physical health, is now this. And I, of course, still don't mean, of course, in some ordinary psychological sense. But what would seem to be the health of someone outside the literal physical level. It is the health that you can seem to get through life. You do not seem to be so depressed that you hide under your bed, that you seem to be able, whether you're all that enthused or not, to plod through, and that you are just simply in the middle of the bell curve of ordinary people. But to stay there, to help life support that continuity, you are driven to talk about health. And the word may not pass your lips. You may not be even thinking to yourself. The thing that's driving your thinking may not be saying, well, what I'm about to talk about myself, and about this book I read, and about this new idea I heard that made me certainly reflect, and I would like to pass on to you, my good friend, here. Let's discuss it. What they're discussing is health. What they're discussing is the noise that helps keep this thing alive. Those of you still looking a little blank, how about this? Right up to date, I'm somewhere surely in the ballpark, it is still considered, always has been, but even now there's, I'm sure, statistical evidence that would lend additional credence to the idea, probably an operational theory in psychology, I'm sure, that a certain predisposition in people, apparently, to be non-communicative, that is, not to talk much, is not considered to be, we'll start off easy, is not considered to be a sign of really good, sophisticated, modern mental health approaches. Contrary, everyone knows that you will hear all the way from a psychiatrist on TV to the latest book. You should talk. You should communicate what you feel. I don't feel too good. Well, let it out, because you'll feel worse if you hold it in. With ordinary people, I'll go ahead and say that's as true as anything. It's obviously needed in life, but insofar as it being correct on the basis that it serves some operational growth function in the individual, that is truly a question that rises above the steam on the sidewalk. But ordinary runnings of the city, people are driven to discuss directly and indirectly health, whether it be called health or illness. And this is stabilized through this continual talk about whether I'm healthy, whether I feel good, whether I think good, whether I'm depressed, whether I have good reason to be upset, whether I do not have good reason to be upset, etc. And conversely, if someone could be so narrowed down, of course it's easy enough, of course, for somebody's wife to tell the psychiatrist or the marriage counselor or somebody really important like Phil Donahue, say, well, when I married the guy, he wasn't bad. I mean, we were hot and we were in love and we were hanging around Jackson and listening to Johnny Cash, and I got all carried away. But now after living with this guy all these years, I don't know, the spark, something's happened. And of course, she did not have access to the UN committee, that subcommittee that was covering that subject of, I fell into a ring of fire. But she, if she does not point it out, or he, if we reverse position, but she would point it out, or at least with a little urging from the visiting psychiatrist or psychologist that day, or from Phil himself, that, well, I'll bet you, can I guess this? Let me just take a wild guess. I bet he doesn't talk much. And the woman would go, you're a mind reader. And the whole audience goes, because they think they're on camera, and she go, but who's surprised? Yes, I don't know, things will go wrong. Sometimes I know he doesn't feel well, or the business is not going good, or after his father died. He wouldn't talk about it. And I say, come on, talk about it. And he wouldn't talk about it. The marriage counselor, Donahue, the audience, everybody goes, yeah. Because it is, not a joke anymore, it is, at that level, highly suspect. And all sorts of verbal, city explanations of this suspicion, all the way from the general psychological idea that one should not hold in past a certain point, if any point anymore, but one should not hold in what one is feeling, what one is thinking. One should not, silence is not, I guess nowadays they'd write up and say, silence is not the sign of being a real man, with a big old little M, of being a real person. That is simply Hollywood bravado, that is outdated, which is obviously becoming outdated at the city level, that particular form. But it's still based upon, having been in the past mainly directed toward men, which is not the point, but is directed at the point that something is wrong. You are harming yourself if you do not talk about if there's something at all regarding your health, which is regarding how you feel. Not just physically, but you're depressed. You have not been acting good. Or ever since your father died last week or a month ago, you never did cry, you didn't talk about it. Now come on, I can see it working on you. Talk about it. An ordinary person cannot fake it, but I will still leave you with a suggestion of this paragraph that contrary to that, whatever a new form of health, some form of health that is not tied to city level, street level, would, vis-a-vis, do-si-do, what we've just been talking about, would, I suggest, be more characterized by non-talk. And just for you people who may have been involved in some other multi-level scheme and came in here by accident, may I warn you, if you don't know how to do this, don't try it. Which, of course, as always, is safe, because if you don't know what you're doing, you can't try it. And someone over here said, well, even people, speak for yourself, sir, that almost know how to do it, still can't hardly do it, so there you are. There was another one that came by. A little expanded version that would say that to the revolutionist, the cost of upkeep of old thinking is simply not worth the expense. Now, down at the ordinary level, with everybody, the expense of keeping up the continuity here of thought, of your thinking processes, which is a form of your, as they would say, I'm sure in the city, your intellectual sanity. The cost of upkeeping this at the ordinary level is never in question, because the cost is always justified, whatever it is, to keep the continuity individually, and then the part that you're contributing to the collective effort of the city. The effort for you to stay sane, the effort for you to stumble through 60 or 70 years, and you feel like, well, I started out driving a Buick, and here I am dying, and I'm still in my Buick. In other words, I started out as Fred or Mary, two-step, or I started out as Fred, White Eagle, or I started out as Fred, I'm not too sharp, White Eagle, or I started out as White Eagle, I've been mistreated, Fred, number 17-46. I was born into a Buick, and thank God at least I'm dying in a Buick. That's it. A kind of continuity that I started off in this line, and I was staying there, and I looked around, and I thought everything apropos to a man in a Buick, which is anything can be thought. I'm okay, I'm not okay, I'm too tall, I'm too short, I'm too fat, I wish I was a woman, I wish I was a tree, I wish I was a dog. How come no one will pay attention to me? Why is everyone looking at me? All of that takes place, as most of you know, inside the confines of a Buick. And so you start there, and it keeps moving along, and someday you go through the valley of the shadow of death, and up through the plains and all that, and then you go over the hill, and there's this big old, I hate to talk about it, but it's not really like a compactor with a car. It kind of works in reverse, off into another dimension. But it's kind of like that, and then you get there and you realize, my time in the Buick's up. But there is the proper feel that I have done my part. I started in the Buick, I'm going out in the Buick, see? It's the continuity. That is the upkeep. That would be the expense that is justified by life no matter what was required. And if that got too straightforward, if life required, which it normally does not, but here and there it does, but not in the mainstream, but along the line, if life suddenly, that you had this feeling, of course you're ordinary, you would think that you had the feeling or it was a new idea, but if life suddenly made you go, I have got to get out of this goddamn Buick and get myself into, if I could only find, a 52 Hudson. And so, trust me, just finding one would be difficult enough. Finding one and then getting in it without people going, ew, or whatever. And then finding parts for it. Let's just assume this is going to take a larger chunk of your attention and energy in life than you had in mind to expend in other things. Perhaps you were trying to do something really worthwhile. Like save up and buy a new guitar or something, or a book of poetry. And here you are faced with suddenly life, or you think that was your idea, that I've just got to do that. It doesn't matter. Whatever the expense was is justified as long as the continuity of life continues. With ordinary people, to say the least, of course, everybody's an ordinary person somewhere, so remember to look inside after you get through looking out there and going, ha-ha. The upkeep, the cost of upkeep of your old thinking is justified. It doesn't matter what it is. And your old thinking could be, and I'm saying you generically, of course, could be that you are filled with nightmares, horrible daydreams. Life needs somebody to do that. So the idea that, well, wait a minute, I don't like this. I wish I could stop it. That may be part of the cost of the upkeep. But insofar as there being anything of approaching an objective view of saying, well, that's a shame, or this person they're carrying too much of their load. Or even if you tried to talk to a person and said, do you ever get the feeling that the repetition of thinking the same things over and over, and they said, don't go any further. Boy, I know what you're about to say. Yes, drive me nuts. I just can't afford analysis. The upkeep is worth whatever the expense is for the continuity of life to continue collectively and individually. And ordinarily, I wasn't trying to pick out extreme anomalies to get you distracted of thinking, well, poor people that have great delusions, because that's not the mainstream. That is not the heart. That's not the middle class that keeps life's great city, known as man, going. But individually, without it being an apparent great anomaly in somebody's intellect, just the ordinary cost of upkeep of people being tired of what they're thinking, or being frightened when they hear new ideas, or being frightened when they hear ideas that seem to be strange to their neighborhood repeated again. The upkeep is always worth the price to life. And with ordinary people, if they would look at it in a certain way, which is not the point, they would agree. Not for the sake of life, but for themselves, because if I described it in a certain way, if you don't already hear it, all I would be describing is a certain kind of continuity, a kind of basic, stable mental health in them, even though they would say, well, now I've got complaints. We could say, hey, start a club. Hey, so there's things I don't like in life. There are things I don't like in me. They're little, I don't want to talk about them, but it has to do with a Girl Scout uniform. But anyway, I have little daydreams that I wish I could pluck out. We could say, well, start a club. What, you think you're unique. So everybody would say, well, I got little complaints. But by and large, they would hear it. that the cost, not just in money, but the cost of them undergoing some great transformation would not be worth it if they were given the opportunity. Because the cost of upkeep, even though they got no choice in paying it, the cost in upkeep is a kind of continuity that I was born in a Buick, and here I go out in a Buick. I always wanted to have a Ferrari, but you know, what the hell, I could have gone nuts. I could have tried to jump from my little Buick into a Ferrari sometime back along about the age of 40 when my hormones were going, You know, and I could have hurt myself in all sorts of ways. I could have hurt myself trying to leap from one to the other. I could have been hurt by trying to leap over there, and even if I grabbed hold of my wife saying, well, so you leaped for a Ferrari. Let's see, now we live in California, and hell, maybe you'll get to leave, you know, keep part of what you got. You get, hey, the expense. There within about 30 seconds, I'm sure all of you appreciate, we went from metaphors to legal theories to symbolism, back to metaphors, and almost sideswiped to simile. Or was that a semi? A revolutionist would not consider the upkeep to any old thinking. He would not consider the cost worthwhile. And I'm not going to stop and try to explain much more about that because it just absolutely breaks down verbally. Worse than some other things, worse than mozzarella. But there is a cost. Ordinary people do not recognize it because the cost is part of them being alive and breathing. But there is a cost to upkeep this. Now, with ordinary people, it would be their sanity. And if I could change, if I could stretch this kind of rubber reality and make things stay the way they are and plus be different at the same time and talk about it, which, of course, we do all the time anyway, it would be that if ordinary people tried that, it'd make them go nuts. Let's just make it easy. And so they can't try it. But you understand there's no way to really describe it. Because if it could be described, all it would end up would be saying, well, all you're going to do is break your mind. And you don't have to be Gordon Lightfoot or whoever it was. And you don't have to wait at the ticket counter. But if you tried to stop the upkeep on here would kind of go, you'd sort of drift off in about, well, several directions too many. When people would talk to you, I guess it would be like talking to a combination of, well, you wouldn't know what to answer, you wouldn't know what to say, you would not be long for freedom on the street. But there is another way for a few people, if you can hear it, that the upkeep on this, and if that sounds too exotic, the continued faith and reliance, the acceptance that what this thinks at the ordinary level, coming to conclusions that may be in the mainstream of life, or that may be a little out of the mainstream enough that you might have other people around you to go, hey, talk about an avant-garde thinker. If you know how to do it, you would have to see that the upkeep of repetition of thinking is simply, keep simply in the sentence, is simply not worth the cost. But at the ordinary level, it simply is worth the cost. For one thing, it requires no effort. And it requires that life does not find fault with you if it had time to notice you, because you are playing the part to keep you stable, to keep you an adequate transformer, and it is helping collectively to keep humanity doing the same. But once you see what it is, the cost, whatever, no matter how small, no matter how large, is not worth it. Old thinking. Old thinking. 5 minutes ago. But I had thinking that was new then. True. Is it new now? Well, it was a few minutes ago. Have you thought it more than once? Well, sure, it was so astounding. I had to lay down and roll over real fast. I thought I was going to catch on fire, and there was nobody around to put me out. And so, yeah, I've thought about it several times. I'm thinking about writing a book, and I'm already considering the sequel to the book if I ever get it writ. It's old thinking, and there's an upkeep to it. Well, wait a minute, you don't know how great it is. You don't know what upkeep is. What? What are you doing now? Well, I was just telling you about it. Yeah, I know. Of course, I could take what they call it, a cheap shot and say, you're defending it. I'm not defending it. You don't know how great it is. Here, let me show you what I wrote here. I mean, this is good stuff. Don't tell me I shouldn't think this again. It's hard to defend without whining. It's hard to talk without whining. It's hard to think without whining. It's hard to live in the city without whining. It's hard to stay in line without whining. Yeah, but I ain't whining. No, wait. Let me tell you. This is some strange stuff now. I'm talking about stuff that people don't even think about. Okay, I love to hear that kind of thing, but just tell me this. Have you thought it before? Well, I had to think before. I couldn't tell you now. The upkeep is not worth it. How much sense, though, can you make out of that? I don't know. Well, try. And if you can't, don't. There's one other we passed a few nights ago, that if you're trying to be a revolutionist, that you should take note of the fact that a person is going to spend their attention, forget just the physical energy of being alive, but this, the secondary, the waterworks, the dynamo, the nuclear power facilities in your city, the secondary ones. You're going to expend this energy either helping life maintain its continuity, or, possible here and there, you might be able to expend these funds in the pursuit of your own private activities. Either way, it all ends up costing the same. Isn't it fun to be nasty? Well, that is, be a conveyor of nasty information. But no matter what you do, it costs the same right then. It costs the same amount. I don't like the sound of that. Who would? Because if an ordinary person could hear that, you'd say, wait a minute. I don't know why I should go into this again. An ordinary person might say to me, or you, blame it on you. You told me to say this. They might say, you mean to tell me, you mean to be so dumb? Life has a way with words. Are you so dumb that you're going to tell me that if I spend my life, as flawed as I may be, as imperfect as I am, but if I spend my life trying to be a good blank, Christian, Jew, Buddhist, you're telling me that right at the end, and I spend a lot of time, forget money and all that, but I spend a lot of my attention trying to pray, meditate, and this. You're going to tell me right at the end that it's going to cost me the same thing as if I had just lived a life of a libertine or even a Southern Baptist. And I say, no way. Except from another view, which is not even hard. You don't even have to get way up in the invisible tower. You can stay out the street and just almost down your toes. Nobody likes it, but realize, Jesus, that's got to be correct. But then you got to get back down and go, no. Because if it was correct, ordinary people, again, it would drive them nutso, because then you'd say, wait a minute. You mean all of my forefathers and foremothers that tried to be a good Jew or Christian or Muslim, and me, that I spent 30 years, you're going to tell me that was all wasted? You can't say it was wasted. I just simply pointed out it all costs the same in the end. It costs the same thing whether you're working for life, which almost everyone has got to work almost all of the time to help life's continuity stay together. But there is some possibility, as witnessed by you people, instead of being out there knocking on doors trying to sell those Amway products, sitting here listening to this stuff, it just shows a few people here and there can sort of drift off now and then and try and look after their own private interest, which, looked at from almost any view right quick, ask you, what good is this doing life? Let's don't go into that. But at the end, whether you attempt to do something, to take your energy, to take the energy that drives this, the highest end of your individual nervous system, where this is coming out, rather than staying involved as you're supposed to, in which you've got to some degree, the same way you got to breathe the air as everyone else, that even Baptists have to breathe the same air, God forbid, as Presbyterians and Lutherans, and you've got to breathe the same air that's available in the city, so you can't get away from it completely. But if you expend the attention of the chemical, electrical energy running up to the highest end of your nervous system, commonly known as the brain, on apparently life's business, all the stuff going on out there, the things you think about, the things you should be concerned about, art, history, warfare, politics, human relations, out there, and it's apparent, tied to in here. You can either spend it out there as you're supposed to and will to some degree, no matter what you do, or else, if you know how and you had the need, is try and take some of that and you run the funds into a private account. You expend it on strictly, for the time being, let's leave it to try and make a point, strictly on your private affairs. Because in the end, it all costs the same. One more that was just hit recently. The heading of the little nonsense, the proverb, the truism, the new proverb, the subversive epigram, epithet, was that just because something doesn't have a name doesn't mean you can't talk about it. And so since sometimes that does not stop us, then how about so off we goeth againeth? All able-bodied, all able-minded, men's and women's in all cities belong to a heretofore unidentified home guard. They don't even know it. They are all part of this undescribed conscription, which I would see fit, and I think you'll agree, I'm sure you will, to call that home guard, that National Guard, they are the defenders of the past. It is a worldwide, out there and in here, it is a worldwide organization. Whatever the case and whenever it arises enough for it to become vocal, that whenever life's need for continuity requires it, all the able-bodied men and women being part of this unidentified home guard, in words more or less, stand right up and solemnly affirm that that which is best has already been thought, writ, and said. It is very important. And it's not an attack, and it's not saying that people are blind, and it's not saying that the whole world is conservative to a fault. But if there was a fair description for this evening of that kind of secret army in which all people in line, all people who are able-minded, the honest burghers of all cities, and don't anybody write and suggest Ham. He died right after Lot, which in fact he said, thanks a lot. I don't know he said that. I am not a biblical. But it is a description on this basis that they are a defender of the past, because individually and historically, that is collectively, people are saying this whether they say the words or not, because it is the energy operating within the framework of continuity that makes the ordinary intellect, doesn't matter who you are in your background and all that, doesn't matter whether you're Democrat, Republican, Tory, Whig, Liberal, Conservative, whenever life needs it, you could be I assume you'll get the point, you could be, from an ordinary street level view, you could be that city's outstanding liberal thinker, politically, economically, and yet, whenever life needs it, and if you happen to be there, if you're at one of the juncture points in life's running this energy, whenever it's needed, you will, whether you use these words or not, you would if you were that city's leading exponent of liberal thought, progressive attitudes, you will still solemnly affirm the fact that that which is best in man has already been said, thought Brit. Individually, if you got any doubt, back to talking about what kind of guy you are, I'll tell you when it really begins to get ripe, once you can smell it. It's a good thing this is not confession, or maybe we'll start a new organization. Instead of the AA, or what's the other one, Drugs Anonymous, and they even got them now, Fundamentalist Southern Religion Anonymous. Says. Anyway, I just thought of a new one. We call it the OGA, the Ordinary Guys Anonymous. That you admit, yes, many times I want to talk about and tell what kind of guy I am. But let me tell you when this gets ripe, now within a closer context of this paragraph about the defenders of the past. And I won't ask you, what I was going to say was I'm not going to actually play OGAs and make some of you stand up and say, my name's Bill and I'm 34, and last week for the first time I heard myself literally say it since you pointed out. I was talking to somebody and they made some comment about they see me out jogging every day, somebody down at the cleaners down the street, and I went, yeah, 5 miles, that ain't bad for a guy at 34. You have reached the age of ripeness. You pass it so quickly that once you could begin to hear it, you almost instantaneously rot. Don't get too distracted, because I know that there are many parts of the intellect. I was trying to get and I believe perhaps we will succeed here, a pretty short, direct, plain sight on this, because the ordinary intellect could argue forever, almost, against the fact of me saying that every able-minded person, man, woman, child, everybody in the city, belongs to the defenders of the past. And whenever life needs it, that fast, gone, forgotten, but anytime it comes back, anytime life needs it, it will call upon anybody. Teddy Kennedy. I'm just trying, do you understand? The most liberal spokesman for any kind of cause will still, and what I was trying to do was short-circuit it for you, will still say that the best in man has already passed. Whereas ordinary intellect of all kinds of people will say that's not true. You're describing conservative people, you're talking about retrogressive thinkers, because I do not believe that. I believe in the goodness of man. I believe in the progress of man. Yeah. And I was trying to short-circuit it for you, because they can say that. That's part of just life, part of the noise. But notice, individually, forget now political parties, individually, what does every swinging pocketbook on this planet eventually do? What do they all do, except those of you that I've tried to scare and humiliate, that maybe you have tried to resist it, but by God, you saw it was there. It was almost as though you're staying in Grand Central Station in the world's largest PA system. Suddenly in the back of your head, while you're talking about something, and you was about to say, you know, it ain't bad for a guy 49. And you thought, no, I won't do that. And it's like the thing almost blew the back of your head off. That kind of sound pressure that you just got to say, no, it ain't. No. There is what I'm talking about. Because there is the individual level, which no matter who you are, you could be the president of the most liberal country in the world, the most liberal political party you could be a leader of. And yet that same guy, you know what he's going to say. Something's going to happen. They're going to say, are you going to stand for the election again for prime minister? You know, don't you get tired? You've been out of office now, the opposition party. You know, I bet that's a real problem. I mean, getting out there and day after day out there on the Hastings and making all these speeches and eating all those cheap dinners. The guy, yeah, it is, but, you know, you got to admit, for a guy 56, and then everybody plays along, it's a little dance, or if they're paying attention anymore, somebody goes, 56? Well, you don't look it. Yeah, I guess so. Do you hear what they're doing? Now forget all kinds of collective historical out there's. You are saying, you are agreeing, you are the proof of what I'm pointing out that's never been pointed out. You are saying the best has already happened. That's exactly what you're saying. Because if the best has already happened to you, I'll tell you what everybody's attitude, if they could see it this way, it's not the point. if I could point that out, they'd say, you're right. Screw the rest of that. I don't care what the hell happens. Now that you point that out. Because when the best has already been done in you, the rest of it, they're just scrambling eggs. I hear noise in the kitchen, but what does that mean to me? Now that you give me the blues and point it out, you're right. I'm 49. Based upon the actuarial tables, let's see, my life is good. Forget about middle-age crazes. I'm downhill. That's all downhill. There's not a chance now of me becoming famous. There's not a chance now of me ever doing the dreams I had. Thanks a lot for pointing it out. Everybody, all able-minded men and women, belong to that secret home guard. They're the defenders of the past, and the basis of it is simply this, and they do not have to say the words, is that the best has already been done. The best is behind man. The best is behind me. Well, you look all right. Well, thanks, but I'm 54. Every time you say that, you're the proof of it. Of course, not talking about it. We shouldn't go off on a sidetrack this late. But like trying to take an approach, trying to use it as a method to be the end of it. Like not talking about it will not free you from its influence. Not talking about it, as many of you have seen the validity of encouragement not to do so, talking about something, I could say, from a street level, will not cure any polarized thing, such as believing that the best is already behind you, that the rest, of course, most people would say, well, perhaps not me, but there may be some modicum of validity in your statement that the best may be behind man. Although we have technology, etc., such as the golden age of Greece, when people really cared about fried food. I mean, when people really cared about thought, and when the city-state itself was built around promoting, trying to raise the human spirit through art and discourse, and throwing heathens to wild animals for fun. They could say that perhaps the best is behind man. No, in you. And so the attempt, back to this sidetrack right quick, the attempt, which is, if you know what you're doing, of course, it's always in order. If I'm trying to now to make you see keeping a foot in the city, down at street level, and a foot trying to climb up an invisible tower, just not talking about it will not cure a polarized problem, but it won't hurt it. And of course, once you know what you're doing, it's not a treatment anyway. It's not a cure. It's just the end of it. But you got no business doing it, because every time you do it, it's again have to draw upon impossible, picturized colorizations of things that the colorblind have never seen. It's like a slow form of suicide. Or if you don't like that, it's like a slow form of continuing to heat up the soles of your shoes so that you will stay firmly rooted in the asphalt of the city. And you can sit there or stand there and holler that you're going to take flying trips and you're going to talk to the cosmos and you're going to raise your level of consciousness. And all the while, you're holding matches to your feet, you're trying to find the hottest place on the pavement. Because if you stay in the home guard, defending the past at the best, has already been said, already been thought, already been done. Do you mean historically? Everybody else? I'm not sure. Or do you mean you? I'm not sure. Stay right where you are. Don't go away. As if they're going somewhere. Now, as opposed to that, what I was going to point out, that if we called it something else, do-si-do, vis-a-vis, blah, 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 it would have to be, not have to, but I'm going to call it the Friends of the Future. This secret army up in an invisible tower, not serving any useful purpose. They're not there to defend the city. They're not there to attack the city. They're trying to be off on a frolic of their own, spending their money on things that God knows what it's going to amount to. But friends of the future, let's call it, as opposed to the defenders of the past, they do not have access to the same kind of specific verbal weapons such as the defenders of the past. As I've already told you, since evidently you lost it there, the defenders of the past, under whatever guise it amounts to this, is life making them say, the best, very likely, to a large degree, the best has already been done. Now, it doesn't matter that somebody, since Montana's big enough to hold everybody, I mean life, it doesn't mean that somebody's going to say, that's not true, because you know that somebody will. But the heart of the able-bodied populace of all cities, of all life circumstances, all times, are always on call. It's the home guard. You know what I mean by that? They're not out there actually in uniform, but any time the president, the king says, all right, all you fifes, fife it up and get over here. Anytime the king wants you, you got to fall in, grab a pitchfork, and show up. That's the home guard. Everybody, no matter whether they agree with this, disagree with it, everybody, whenever life needs it, will be immediately called up, and they will say, that is, they will transfer this energy, which comes out in words more or less of saying, wait a minute, the best has already been done. That is specific. Forget whether it's true or false. Forget any kind of argument. It is at least specific. The friends of the future have access to no such verbal weapons. There are no verbal certainties available to describe the future, to comment on the future. If any of you that's really got dumbass street-level intellects, I guess it could say, well, that's not true, because my intellect, I could say, the future looks bright. You in Timbuk3, you got to wear shades. You can say, yeah, the future looks bright. Listen to that. How great does that sound? I have faith in the future. I'm sure every day somebody says something like that, but does it make the headlines? Does it make the news? Do you gain a reputation in any field, from poetry to economics, by saying, I don't know, to me, I've got a great deal of faith in the future. Maybe they'll let you teach Sunday school somewhere. But that is not the nature of the city. Those who pass for intelligent have got some comment. It may be on the basis of, I hate to be here and play Cassandra with you people, but you did invite me on this program, and I must tell you, I did not spend 30 years working for the federal government, being on the Fed board, the Reserve Board, studying economics. I did not do that to show up here with some kind of beanie with a propeller on and blow smoke toward you people, because I'm going to have to tell you, it may not be a depression, but the economics of this country are not what they were a year ago. Now that people begin to write, What's he saying? The best is already behind us. Well, it may run some kind of cycle, but who cares about that? Because then you're talking about the future, and you cannot talk about it as specifically saying, because people go, ooh. But what are you going to say about the future? Other than you could say, listen, I majored in future thinking, if there was such a program. I have labeled myself a futurist. All I do is sit around. I don't worry about the past. I don't know crap about history. I have applied my little brain. I am studied, and I look at everything that's going on now. I thought you didn't know anything about the history. Don't bug me. Wait a minute. I'm trying to picture the future, and that's all I think about. That's all I think about. Well, what can you tell us? I'm really enthused about it. I feel good about the future. I mean, what are you going to do? Does that strike you? That's why you're laughing. It's because you know that is not, the man's not going anywhere. He's going to have to take a lesson, these guys that they may say they're not Cassandras, but they're all playing to some degree. What I'm telling you is Chicken Little, and so he's got to think. Wait a minute, you need any help? Can I come over and work in your field for a while? There is nothing specific that, let's call this an invisible would-be band. The friends of the future, they have no verbal information, no verbal weapons, no verbal ammunition available. It's just not available to compete, if it was a competition, but to counteract, to even be a parallel, to be a party to the general noise of the defenders of the past, which is the best, to varying degrees, but the best is obviously behind us. There is nothing to compete with that in the widest metaphorical sense. There is nothing that if there were a group, the friends of the future, There is nothing that they can say that operates at that same chemical level with ordinary intelligence. Because all you can say, you can say, well, that's not true. The best is not behind us. The best is yet to come. And reporters or other people say, you really mean that? Yes, I do. I swear to God I mean that. Just trust me. One or two people may take it, right down, but they're going to start looking around for somebody to holler the sky's coming down. Because this is not going anywhere. It does not strike street level with any intensity of the kind of energy that life needs for the continuity. And one way to look at it is that at city level, there is no conception of the continuity in the future. Because the best is always that they could come up with. If somebody really tries to picture the future, they are tied in a three-dimensional sense. This is not the limit, of course. But they are tied to what seems to be now, which is already gone, and the past. You ever think the past, I was just then? Well, yeah. So the continuity is such that when they talk about the future, if they get together, futurists, I know they got a title for that now, the best futurists get together, what's the best they can come up with? Their idea of the future is always this. It's some variation of, by God, someday soon we'll have flying pigs. That's all you can do. All they can do is take the continuity of now, the defense, even though they don't mean it, and they would argue that now the best is not behind us. But if I said, all right, describe the future, the best that life makes available to ordinary intellect, their best is to take whatever happened, even if they say it wasn't the best. All they can do is take pigs and wings and stick them together and say that's the future. Maybe I'm not exactly on the money, but it has something to do with flying pigs. What are you going to do with it? Because you're still saying the best is behind us. And they can say, no, I'm not saying the best is behind us. And I can say, well, all right, why do you keep using the past? Boy, that got them, didn't it? If they could listen a certain way, yeah, it would have them. Because how are you going to respond to that? You can't. And the basis is because there is no way to talk about the future. There is no way for fish in the bowl to have any conception of what's going on inside the mind, much less inside the environment that would seem to be connected to the mind of whoever's at the end of this hand rigging the fingers down in the bowl of your water, which is a 3D world. It is too unpredictable. There is no solid, comforting predictions possible. There's nothing can be said about the future at street level. There's nothing the three-dimensional creature can say that has any validity. It's why you laugh without knowing it. It's why you can't make a good verbal, you cannot have a good impacting prediction of the future. All you can do is say, I got faith in the future, as opposed to I don't have faith in the future, which is the same thing as the best is behind us. And so any other possibility is what? Well, I'm telling you the best is not behind us. Well, tell me more. Well, I'm telling you that the future looks great to me. We're just in for good times. Well, give me some idea. Oh, I foresee, maybe not today, maybe not next week, but pigs flying. But you're saying the best is behind us. No, I'm not. Well, don't use the past then. Tell me what the future is going to be. It's not an attack, it's not a debate, because they can't. But notice, no one knows. And if this were a secret army, which it is, no it's not, but which it is, it would be. You're like conspirators, collaborators, allies, patrons, at least sympathizers of the future. But what can you do directly? I'm not saying there's nothing you can do, but back to the verbal level, what can you say to show your support, your collaboration, your sympathy? I mean, it's bad enough you don't know what it is, but just if it strikes you now, even non-verbally, by God, I'm in favor of the future, as opposed to what the alternative is, which is why you're involved with this kind of stuff. But this then ask you, or if you'd ask yourself, well, what can I say? What could I say to somebody? What could I say to me? I suggest the health of revolutions might be best characterized by a whole lot of silence. Trying to play macho. Not necessarily. Trying to hold in your feelings until you bust a gut or something. Well, not necessarily. Would they ever guess why? Would your old intelligence ever guess why? Never. Because there's nothing to be said. Well, yeah, the sense makes sense, but, you know, what's the trick? What do you really mean? We're all wrapped up. All done for. Bye. Don't forget, get out there and knock on those doors. And be sure there's an extra 10% this month for the floor wax. So.